Hello and welcome to the program. I am Imonia Marere. Since the conclusion of the 2023 general elections, there have been calls and, in some cases, even agitations to take another legislative look at some provisions of the Electoral Act 2022. You will recall that the subsisting law governing the conduct of elections was enacted only in 2022, just about a year before the 2023 general election. It was therefore only put to the test fully during the 2023 elections. The calls and agitations for its review may have been prompted largely by some observed gaps during the operationalization of the document. Politicians who did not clearly understand the import of some of the provisions of the Act, or who misinterpreted the letters and spirit of the provisions, have also been crying wolf. In fact, some have been crying blue murder in the application of the Electoral Act. But of course, the courts, that is the electoral courts, have validated those portions of the Electoral Act up to the Supreme Court. Now, be that as it may, a bill is now before the House of Representatives, sponsored by Francis Ejirogene Waive, seeking to amend 5 provisions of the 2022 Act. The bill seeks to 1. Amend Section 10, subsection 3 to provide for INEC, which is the electoral body, to carry out a re-registration exercise of all eligible voters every 10 years. And 2. Amend Section 28, subsection 1 of the Act to make it mandatory for presidential, National Assembly, state governors, and state House of Assembly elections to be conducted on the same day. 3. To amend Section 47, subsection 3 to automatically disqualify anyone from voting where the process of accreditation specified in the Act fails. 4. Amend Section 60, subsection 5 to provide for the transfer and transmission of results electronically by presiding officers. And 5. Amend Section 130, subsection 2 of the Act to provide that any person who presents what an election court determines to be a frivolous and time-wasting petition shall pay a huge fine to the respondent. Now, the questions that have arisen as a result of this process, as a result of this bill that is now before the House of Representatives include: should a country's electoral law be subjected to alteration or amendment after every election? Has the 2022 Electoral Act been subjected to enough rigorous operational tests with just one election cycle to warrant amendments so soon? Is this an admission of the failure on the part of the lawmakers of the 9th National Assembly for not critically and thoroughly examining the provisions of the 2022 Act before its passage into law? And how far can these proposed amendments go in refining and reforming the observed challenges in the electoral process and the electoral system? And finally, are there structures in place to support some of the envisaged changes if this amendment goes through? For instance, are there structures to conduct all elections in one day? These are some of the issues that we will be trying to find answers to on the program today. And I'm joined in the studio by the man who is the prime mover of the amendment bill. He represents Ughelli South, Ughelli North, and Udu federal constituencies from Delta states. He is a priest, an accountant, and an author. Honorable Francis Ejirogene Waive. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
And we're also joined by Sefi Abichi, who is the head of knowledge management and learning at Yaga Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, we'll be diving straight into our discussion right after now. Stay with us.
Our dream, the Nigeria we need, is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria, which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Let's now go into our discussion as we look at the amendment bill, amendment to the Electoral Act 2022 that is before the nation's House of Representatives. And the prime mover of that amendment bill, 5 items or 5 provisions there, is right here with us. Honorable Francis Ejirogene Waive. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So let me ask, what was the motivation for proposing this bill?
Well, first, I was a part of the 9th House of Representatives, and I know what we intended to achieve. By the time we began to go through the elections, I could see a difference between our intendment and what was happening on ground. So that was challenge number 1. And then 2, after the elections, we've gone through huge litigations. I personally had 2 matters at the tribunal and 2 at the Court of Appeal, costing a lot of money. And I thought there are things that could be done differently to reduce the extent of litigation that we had. In Delta State, for instance, we not only had 1 tribunal, we had tribunal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that was huge. The litigations that came up have never been that much in the country. In fact, for governorship across the country, 75% of the governorship elections went as far as the Supreme Court. So I thought there's a problem there. And then interacting with constituents, you hear what they have to say. And when you came out of the rerun elections, I thought it was time now to make this document a better one. For fairer elections, more credible, more transparent, more that reflects more of the wishes of the people. And I thought, as a lawmaker, I have that privilege to be able to aggregate the views of Nigerians, my constituents and Nigerians generally, and bring on the table for an amendment of that act. And that's the motivation. And I believe we would have a better country when this is done. This is our country. I have no other country. This is my country, and this is your country. So we must do what it takes to make it better. And I believe we can make it better.
Now, it's a good thing that you were a member of the 9th National Assembly. So the question is, was it that the members of that assembly did not thoroughly scrutinize the electoral amendment bill that was passed in 2022 to see some of these gaps that you now see?
Yeah, I can assure you that we did a thorough job. In fact, we had to even invite INEC and then NIMEC to come and talk to us on this matter of electronic voting, electronic transmission, and what is possible. From all that the interactions we had, the public hearing and all of that, we concluded that the issue of electronic voting may not be possible in some parts of the country. That is real-time voting and results, shown electronic. No, not transmission of results now. Transmission of the results, real-time voting. We concluded on that. But for electronic transmission, we were advised, and we so agreed, that transmission of results is possible because there's no part of this country where we don't have network, the GSM network at the moment. So if you finish compiling the results with the beavers and all that, you could get network and transmit it to the INEC portal. We are short of that. But where I think there was a shortfall was that beavers was made mandatory in the INEC guidelines, not in the Electoral Act. So left at the whims and caprices of INEC, to make a choice of what to do, either manual transmission or electronic, depending on what is feasible at the moment. INEC chose what they want at one point or the other. And having gone through the process, I realized that leaving that for INEC, and INEC's guideline is it's a subsidiary legislation compared to the Electoral Act, which is also subsidiary to the grand norm, which is the Constitution. So in my thinking, we should have made the transmission clear, definite in the Electoral Act to be electronic transmission. And that is possible. We've experienced it during the election. We now saw that what we thought of is possible. So no need leaving it for INEC to decide whether to do so or not. The Electoral Act should make it mandatory for INEC, and then they go ahead and do that. So it will help us get more credible elections as we go forward.
All right, let me bring in Sefia at this point in time. I'm sure you have seen a copy of the amendment bill proposed by the honorable member. My first question to you is the 2022 Electoral Act, which is actually an amendment of the 2010 Electoral Act itself. Have we really tested it well enough to begin to think of another amendment less than 1 year after the 2023 elections?
So for me, first it's not about the year, it's about the number of elections that were subjected into using this 2022 Electoral Act. We had a lot of elections. We had the presidential, the senatorial, and...
one election cycle.
Yes.
Just one election
Yeah,
cycle.
but there were different elections conducted within the cycle.
Yeah.
And I'm of the opinion that there's no perfect piece of legislature, and there's always opportunity for improvement. And we know that a democracy is a growing democracy, so we should take opportunity, or we should take advantage of the opportunity to upgrade or review our piece of legislation. That's on one hand. On the other hand is that there's opportunity for review. Apart from election administration, Honorable mentioned that they all went through the court process. And we know that the judgments emanating from the court also provide an opportunity for us to reflect on the existing piece of legislation, as well as look at what is the way forward. And I think it's going the right step in the right direction to see this is an opportunity for us to review ahead of not just other elections, but the 2027 general elections. And the faster or the earlier we do that, the better for us to test this piece of legislation in some elections. And no matter how critical the analysis is being done during the passage or the process of reviewing and enacting this bill, unless this bill is tested, and that's why even after the act was tested in the Ekiti and Osun elections, people were waiting for it to be tested in the general elections so that we could see what are the advantages, what are the opportunities presented. Yes, it's true that there were opportunities that were seen, and different elements took advantage of the opportunity, because in as much as anybody is trying to improve this process, we also have elements that are trying to avert this process. So it's a welcome development, but what I would say is that perhaps we should also look at what are the issues. There were pending issues before the 2022 Electoral Act was passed that were not taken advantage of. Can we also bring these issues?
Well, what are those issues?
Yeah, there are issues of unbundling INEC. There are issues of election surrounding electoral offences. That's establishment of electoral offence commission to address issues around electoral offences. There are issues of electronic transmission of results. We know that in Nigeria and other African countries, one of the weakest links in election administration is transmission of election results. So these are some of the issues. And yes,
And the last one is accommodated in this proposed bill.
yes, it's accommodated in the proposed bill.
Yes.
Of course, yeah.
So the other two are the ones that probably you are asking the honourable member to consider accommodating in this proposed bill.
Yes, or yes, if there's room for that, these are things we should, the National Assembly, the honourable member and his colleagues can also explore as we move forward in our electoral democracy.
Is it possible that perhaps the 2022 Act was passed and assented to too close to the 2023 elections? And so there may have been some element of rush on the part of the lawmakers. And that's why there were some of these oversights that we're now beginning to notice.
So I will not say there were...
Less than 1 year to the... Or just about a year to the 2023.
Yeah, but a year is okay, and I think 6 months, because that's 6 months, that's the minimum. You cannot pass, you should not change the law 6 months. Some change it even less than 6 months, but based on international standard, it should not be less than 6 months. That's one. Secondly, remember that the process of the electoral reform process did not happen and ended in the day the election, the bill was passed.
Signed, yeah.
It was an entire process that took over 2 years, period of 2 years. You remember the back and forth the National Assembly had with the presidency, even on the Electoral Act. So for someone like me that has followed the process in the last assembly, I think there was enough time. And of course, a lot has gone into the bill. If you look at the differences between the 2022 Electoral Act and the 2010 Electoral Act as amended, you see that, of course, there are lots of differences. There were lots of significant amendments that capture even inclusion of people, introduce and allow the use of the beavers that we're having at the moment, as well as addressing other issues, even timeline of the elections, the new timeline we have for the elections and all other issues around the elections. So for me, it's not enough. But again, perhaps is to look at what are some of the provisions proposed by Honorable and his colleagues in the present amendment bill that is before the House of Representatives.
We'll come to the specifics of each of those amendments proposed by the Honourable Member. But Honourable Member, do you think that these 5 provisions that you are seeking amendment to is comprehensive enough in the light of what she has said?
Yeah, I must say, first of all, that in 2010, no, not 2010 now, the 8th Assembly had also tried to amend the 2010 Act, but the then president did not sign because, according to him, it was too close. So that's why in the 9th Assembly, we did it much earlier. And now in the 10th Assembly, we're even doing it even earlier so that we don't run into that challenge of it's too close to the next election. So having said that, I want to say that since my amendment bill came up on the floor, there have been a number of amendment bills being proposed by members. Remember that our Speaker, the Right Honourable Tajuddin Abbas, had said that electoral reforms was one of the core issues we are going to deal with in our electoral agenda in this 10th Assembly. So more members have been coming up with more amendments to the Act. You know, I serve as chair of the Committee on Rules and Business, so I get many of those papers to get listed on the other paper. For instance, there's one that came in during the week to achieve the purpose of litigation being over before we assume office. That's the target of that member, you know. And I've noted, too, that she has mentioned now modeling INEC and the Electoral Affairs Tribunal. So all of that is going to come up before we get to the public hearing. You know, my bill has been referred now to the Committee on Electoral Matters, INEC and Electoral Matters. So there's going to be more of such bills that will come up and be referred to that committee. Thereafter, the committee will aggregate all of these and do a public hearing where CSOs, stakeholders, INEC will be invited to add their own opinion. So there's room for more integration of ideas of how to make the Electoral Act
In
better.
other words, you are open to accommodating more amendments being added to your
Oh,
bill?
sure, sure. We want a better electoral process. We want a better country. And we can't get a better country if we don't have the process of electing good leaders. You know, our problem today in our country, where we are today, is a product of the leadership. It's amazing how some people are thrown up into position of leadership, not the best of us. So what happens to the best of us? That's a big challenge. And I believe that if the electoral laws are such that the best of us can be encouraged to come up into leadership, then the country will get better. That's my thinking. And so we're open to receiving more ideas. From now on, Nigerians can reach out to their legislators, their federal lawmakers, with ideas they think they can propose for amendment, and we will give room to that. And all of that will be done at the public hearing. And even if they don't do that, at their public hearing, Nigerians will be invited to present memoranda, to be advertised in newspapers. Enough time will be given, and I believe that we'll get it right.
Sophia, before we go into the specifics of these amendment bill, there are many Nigerians, quite a sizable number of Nigerians, who think that the Electoral Act, and in fact our Constitution as it is today, is a petit bourgeois document, one that does not really address the needs, the aspirations, and the projections of many Nigerians, and that there should be a much more radical reform and re-examination of these documents. So,
if I'm going to be honest with you, is to say that, first of all, it's difficult. If you ask what are those radical reforms people are expecting, it's difficult to articulate those radical reforms. Secondly, what are those issues? I've heard people criticize and say, oh, our constitution is not the constitution is blah, blah. Like I said, there's no perfect piece of legislation everywhere in the world, even the US Constitution. What I'll say is that we have the opportunity in Nigeria to even review ours. In the US, one of the most difficult thing to do is to amend the Constitution. We have states like state of New Hampshire that their Constitution provides for payment of $100 to the lawmakers, and this started in the 1890s till today. It's difficult for them to amend those laws. We have the opportunity. But again, time changes. The laws, we know that we make the law for the future, but as time goes on, with the changes, especially with the introduction of technology, we're bound to review our laws in order to address both economical, social, political, and now technological issues confronting us as a nation. So for me, these are some of the issues. But for Nigerians that need constitution review process might kick up in the National Assembly. It's an opportunity for citizens to also engage this process, to see, okay, what are those reviews? What are those reforms you want to? For instance, in Yaga Africa, we worked and supported and advocated for the review of the legislation to reduce the age reduction for contesting for offices. This is one way. So instead of sitting back and looking and criticizing the existing law, we cannot suspend this, and we should not suspend our constitution. The crisis happening in Senegal now is a constitutional crisis, and why are people calling on an intervention in the Senegal? Because there's a constitutional crisis. That is to say, no matter how bad the constitution is a law that governs and provides some level of sanity in a nation, and it also gives the nation some level of independence and respect and autonomy it gets from not just the international community, but other countries.
As an aside, Honorable Member, some 60 members of the House, your colleagues in the House, have also proposed a bill to change our system of government from the presidential to the parliamentary system. How is that likely to impact this bill?
Well, that amendment bill that has come up for parliamentary system of government, it's a constitutional amendment bill. So it's not an Electoral Act amendment bill. That will go before the Constitutional Review Committee, which is, of course, traditionally headed by the Deputy President of the Senate and then the Deputy Speaker. Those will be referred to them after the second reading. How it will affect the Electoral Act,
If it succeeds.
If it succeeds.
Yes.
When it has succeeded, it's at that time we have to now do another amendment to the Electoral Act to reflect, because the Electoral Act has presently, stated, it's supportive of presidential system of government. So if the parliamentary system sails through constitutional review, the Electoral Act, of course, will have to be tinkered with. But that will be for another day, because you know that it's more difficult to amend the Constitution. The requirements, for instance, 2/3 of all elected members, you must get that to amend any part of the Constitution. And if you are going into states creation or local government creation, you are not looking for 4/5 of all elected members. Whereas in the Electoral Act, all you need is simply a majority of members present to amend the Electoral Act. That's a lot of difference. Again, for the Constitution, you also have to go around the 36 states and get 2/3 of their state assemblies concurring. So that's a very huge tax. It's a good idea that we can speak out, we can have our say. People can say they want parliamentary system, but it's a long journey ahead. Unlike the Electoral Act that we can do by a simple majority in the National Assembly.
Okay, let's come to the specifics now of your bill. The first amendment you are proposing there is for the Electoral Commission, INEC, to carry out re-registration exercise of all eligible voters every 10 years. Now, that provision of the Electoral Act, that's Section 10, subsection 2, for instance, had actually provided for continuous voter registration. How is the continuous voter registration different from re-registration?
Yeah, we are retaining that section and subsection that deals with re-registration, which is more of revalidation, which INEC does before every general election. In that instance, what INEC does is to register those who have become of age, and then they clean up the register. If somebody is dead, you come and point it out and all that. But we find that that is not enough. You find a lot of people who have, names of people who have died years ago, still on the register. This thing you call voter turnout, I don't think it is exactly true when you say you have 10% of the registered voters turning out, because many on that register are simply no longer existing. Either they've migrated or they are dead. But what I seek to achieve by adding a new subsection is a total fresh re-registration. That does not stop the revalidation that goes on before every general election. That does not stop the revalidation that goes on. But at the end of every 10 years, the present register is declared null and void, completely useless. The new registration is not going to be built on the existing register. It's a fresh thing. And if you do that, you have a more realistic register, such that although we have voter apathy, we'll be able to have a more realistic measure of the voter apathy that we have. You have more people turning out eventually. I mean, vis-a-vis the voter register. I think it's a necessity. It will also stop or reduce the possibility of manipulating the election results. If a politician has 10,000 voters card in his custody, or 20,000, or as the case may be, he can tinker with that, with the election results. But if it is reduced in such a way that what he has to tinker with is maybe 20 or 30 or 100, you find that we'll be getting nearer a more credible election. And I think that this is an amendment that we should allow to pass. It will help our country, it will help our electoral process, it would make our elections more credible, more transparent. That's my belief.
It's incredible that politicians could have as many as 10,000 voters cards when they are just one individual. But what do you think is the global standard, the international standard for this, going by this provision, this recommended amendment?
So, first of all, I understand that this provision is meant to address issues of credible elections, because we're all aware that credible elections is against the backdrop of a credible voter register. But for me, there are other dimensions too. And the first proposed dimension is perhaps look at synchronizing this voter register with that of NIMC. In other clients, voter register, which is popularly called voter list, is not a common nomenclature. In 2022, June, I was in Malaysia with people from North America, other African countries, working on voter register. And it was interesting to see that in our client is a bit different. And this is because we did not have a good database management system in the country. This is one way.
Malaysia has just had an election.
Malaysia was a country convening the program.
Maybe it was preparatory to their last election. Okay.
I'm not too sure. One. Then on the other hand is, can we also look at other proposals? Because the process of developing and starting a new register is a very, very hectic process. At the moment, we've not been able to conduct census because of the challenges around financial, logistic, and other issues. Now, there is another proposal to addressing this issue on the voter register. And this proposal is perhaps to provide an opportunity for revalidation, as against currently INEC updates the register. What they do, they keep adding to the register. Can we look at revalidating the register to say, okay, if you've not voted after 2 successive elections, you should submit yourself for revalidation.
Or you get out.
Yes, or you'll be numb. They will not take you out, but you'll be numb. When you're ready, you reactivate it. Because this is the first biometric database we're maintaining in this country. And I know that countries like even Sierra Leone and other countries were beginning to emulate such. I know Ghana started before Nigeria. That's the second proposal. But the third proposal is to say, okay, instead of doing that, and which is what myself and my organization are working on, is to come up with a framework for, one, cleaning up this voter register. Interestingly, last year we did a discussion paper to look at this voter register because there are questions around voter turnout and also the credibility of the register. If you're talking of voter turnout, you need to also interrogate the credibility of the register. So what about developing a framework to address for cleaning up of the voter register? There's a standard procedure for voter register cleanup, which is called voter register audit, that is being used in different nations. That's one. The second thing is to look at a framework for interagency collaboration. We have other databases. Can we also bring that to fore? Now we have immigration and NIMC working together, and national population. There should be a framework for coordination and management and interagency engagement in terms of that. Then finally is to, which we are also working on, is coming up with a statistical model that will help make projections on the estimation of the number of people in the register, as well as projections, which will help planning. At the moment, and this will help address some of the issues we had before the 2023 election. Remember, ending 2022, there were issues of some states over-bloating their register. So if you're able to use scientific models to make estimation to say, okay, in Rivers State, for instance, in Nasarawa State, in Plateau State, you're expected to have at least within this period, so number of registered voters. It will also help you to know whether the register is over-bloated or under-captured, because people are looking at issues of over-bloating. There are also issues of under-capturing of eligible registered, because voter registration is not mandatory, it's optional. And voter apathy and other issues could also lead to that. And even the system of registration could also discourage people from. So there are different administrative processes and other processes that I think we can also adopt to address some of these issues. And that's why I said, yes, the intention is valid, but there are other dimensions we can also explore.
One underlining factor or one underlining issue about this is having a credible database in the country.
Yes.
Why do we have so many databases in different places? We don't have one single database. In Zimbabwe, where I have had to cover elections on a number of occasions, and many other countries where I've been privileged to cover elections. You go to the polling station, you don't have a voter's card, you have a national ID card.
ID card,
That is your voter's
Valid.
card.
Yeah.
So why can't we have a single database? We have database captured by the Federal Safety Commission, by the banks, by the NIMSI, by the GSM companies have in fact a better database than a number of our government agencies. Why we're unable to conduct an acceptable census?
So
We don't even know how many we are.
I think that's a proposal of synchronizing. The first option I lay on the table, can we synchronize with the NIMSI? And I must say that you have been indeed privileged to cover Zimbabwe elections, because this is one of the most difficult elections. A lot of civil society are deprived access to Zimbabwe elections. So I think you're very privileged. We also need to consult you to say how you got how you got that access to Zimbabwe to observe elections. So, and I think Nigeria has improved a lot in terms of its database management in the last 10 years. And these are my reasons.
I don't think there's anything to celebrate in that.
No,
With the improvement you are talking about is not significant enough to celebrate.
I think it is in a way that before now, no database talk to each other. Now, your NIMSI talks to your BVN, and it talks to your, what do they call? Your international passport.
Yeah.
And
it talks to your bank account.
now it's beginning to, yes, which is your BVN, it talks to your bank account.
Yes.
And now there's an option and provision to also talk to your driver license. So I think it's a good progress, but as far back as just 2015, 2014,
It was none of
everybody is on his own.
So the progression now should be, you should talk to your voter's card.
Yeah, so the progression is synchronize it and look at which one is best. Should we also work with your own identification as a citizen? But I know that there will be issues around, where to vote and where not to vote. People will begin to say, because voters can't tie you to a polling unit. But there are modalities to address this. In some clients, what they do is your address give you access. I know that in UK, they said that also happens in UK. I know that in Florida, that work on elections, that also is applicable. So there are lots of ways to address some of these issues that might be thrown out.
Okay, Honorable, I'm going to combine this question with your second proposal on the bill, which has to do with what you talked about, the structures, the resources, the logistics required for conducting or carrying out voter registration, re-registration every 10 years. That, of course, also applies to your proposal, in your second proposal, which says we should hold elections, presidential, National Assembly, governorship, the State House of Assembly elections, all in one day.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before coming up with these amendments on the floor, I've done my own research on the amount of money the National Assembly, appropriates to INEC. And I've gone through the INEC budget to see what goes into the process of this re-registration and revalidation. And I've tried to do a calculation of what more we will need to do a proper re-registration. And I come to the conclusion that the difference, if any, is very minimal. So it's not something that is going to cost the country some huge fortune. It's just a little over what INEC currently spends on doing this revalidation and re-registration before every cycle of elections.
The continuous registration
exercise. Yeah, the continuous registration exercise. You know, and then you talked about the
Section 2, I mean, the second provision,
which is
holding all the elections in one day. Yes.
Yeah, to me, that's a lot of cost saving for our country, because it will just take the cost of conducting elections, that we currently do for, say, the National Assembly and the presidency. You take that cost and simply add the cost of printing two more ballot papers, which is for the governor and the state assembly. That's just the additional cost, at least for that day. But when you look at it globally, it saves the money that you will spend in doing election on another day. where you shut down the economy, where you bring in all the security agents again, where you get staff, both ad hoc and permanent, it would, I mean, will save minimum 75% of the total cost.
And the cost too, which you politicians have to incur
Yeah.
in mobilizing voters every time you want them at the polling station.
Yeah, all that cost to be saved. You know, so apart from cost saving, it will reflect more the wishes of our people. Because if you notice, after every first election, the National Assembly presidential election, people look at how INEC obeyed the law, didn't obey the law. They look at the dynamics of what happened during that first election. And then, oh, they didn't, Beavers was not head to. Oh, incidence form had cropped up without being named incidence form. So there's an action towards just messing up the whole system, such that the second election does not really show the, if the first one reflects it, the second one even goes further to not to reflect the wishes of the people. You will not have that opportunity of that, what they now call bandwagon effect. You will not have that in this case. And then, if you do all in one day, there would also be that that idea that the presidency and the local government, states elections are different elections. It's one election, really, one country, and we should be able to move the country forward. The 2023 election, if it was done, all were done in one day, I assure you that the differences would have been huge.
Of course, the elections in Nigeria, Sophia, have always been, I mean, logistics nightmares. And I'm wondering if you now put all of these elections in one day, how much greater nightmare it will be or less nightmare it will be for the Electoral Commission, for security agencies, for politicians, for the media, and for all others who are involved in elections.
Exactly. This goes in line with my thoughts. And we understand we're in the times where we need to cut the cost of governance, and governance issues is very, very valid. And I also remember that in 2014, 2013, there was the debate. Should we stagger elections? Should we have elections in one day? But coming back to what you said, two things for me. First is we also need to look at the voters' ability to engage this process without having issues. We have our rejected ballots, which I term wasted votes, at level as high as 5%, approximately 5%, because if you have 4.5, 3.8% at different elections, it shows that these are wasted ballots, despite the voter education that goes into. And this percentage can also make a difference in terms of an elections. I know that countries like Kenya are having issues with one-day elections to see voters are having too many ballots to sort out on election day. So it also affects the quality of participation, because while you're looking at increased participation, you're also looking at what is the quality of participation. And we know that voting is the first level of political participation you can ever have. On the other hand, coming to what you were saying is to look at, I think if we're not careful, it will create opportunity for election manipulation. In as much as INEC is grappling with election administration as it is, we see how some of these presiding officers and polling units grapple with management of 2-3 elections on election day. I'm not sure, I'm not too convinced that INEC and some of the officers we have at the forefront can manage numerous elections on election day. Because what will happen is that you're going to have like 5 different ballots. I know that some countries have more than 5, but they also are complaining of the challenges they have. Coming back to logistics, before you know it, you hear that they brought 2 ballot papers and forgot 2. Or
Yeah,
they
but we
bought 3.
experience the same,
Yeah.
even now that we do 3-2.
Yeah, so
We still
if we
experience the same.
cannot grapple, if we cannot manage the little we have, how sure are we? Then it also creates opportunities for manipulation. And I'm sorry, I'm not a politician, but you see how politicians will also take advantage of this opportunity, even though it's supposed to be an issue to address a problem, but it can also be an opportunity for manipulation. So these are some of the concerns, because I've had a conversation with some people around these specific provisions, and some people think that people that are calling for one-day elections are a bit elitist than people that are calling for staggered elections. And like I said, it has been a debate that's been there for over 8 years. But these are some of the issues that I think that may be challenging when it comes to when it comes to the feasibility of this provision.
And there's also...
Can we also think of doing 5 elections on 5 different days? So that we'll solve all these problems we're talking about. You see,
well, these are options because there are some
you know
governorship
that,
elections
no,
now.
If you look at it that way, then you'll find that doing all in one day is better.
I was even surprised that...
What then happens to the governorship elections now that are already staggered by, I mean, fortuitously by court
the
and
off-season elections.
Off-season elections, yes.
You know, so we look at those ones and you say, how credible, how much better are they? You know, so if you take all these problems, is enumerated.
No, but how do you bring such staggered off-season elections back into one basket?
No, we can't do that unless you go into a constitutional...
Exactly, that's the point.
Now, the issue here is, do we not do the 5 on 5 different days so as to solve those problems? So you weigh the pros and the cons.
Well, yes.
And
well,
for me, I've weighed all, and I think doing all in one day is better for our country. Not just economically, but also in terms of transparency, the results that come in credibility. I think if you do all in one day, it will be better.
Do you also think that that would bring out more voters? Considering the fact that we have not had more than a 35% voter turnout in any one of our elections. In fact, the last one, we had about 28% or thereabouts.
I wouldn't agree with that voter turnout percentage, that ratio, because I don't believe in that register. You know, that's why I'm proposing
No, but that's the register we have now at the moment.
I would say that if you are doing the 5 in one day, it could encourage some people to say, let me just go and do this and done with it, you know. But when you are doing it a second time and a third time, some people can't just take it. They can't leave their business, particularly those who travel to vote. We still have situations where people leave Abuja to go home to vote.
When they should be voting in Abuja, where they reside.
Place of residence. So when you do that, people don't want to travel 2-3 times. But when you now say you're doing all in one day, you can have a situation where people will be encouraged to say, oh, Ben, let me go and take advantage of this and perform my civic duties.
Okay. Well,
it will surprise you to know that there are other countries that stagger one elections. DRC, in just their December elections, the presidential election was staggered across 5 days for efficiency, and this is to address their weaknesses and issues when it comes to election administration.
Even India,
if you
staggers it over a month.
You know, if you do that
parliamentary elections.
If you do that in Nigeria, then you know that it won't be an election anymore.
All right, Honorable. Let's quickly address the other point, which is the issue of disqualification, automatic disqualification of a voter if the accreditation process fails.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure in the course of our talking, we had addressed the issue of transmission electronically of results. But let's look at this.
Yes, no accreditation, no voting.
Yes.
You know, from my experience in the 2023 elections, beavers performed much better than the card reader that it replaced. And in places where beavers did not quite accredit people, INEC made provisions. I saw myself where calls were made, other beavers machines were brought, or personnel who could operate it better and all that way. So beavers really did well. From my experience, 904 units in my constituency, from my experience, where beavers did not work was deliberate. It was deliberate. Otherwise, beavers, give it to INEC, beavers ought to be the game changer. But people decided to bypass beavers. And what
so that's the human element?
Yes, because I'll give you an example. At the end of election day, I had on my phone my agents who had snapped the signed results. For more than 70% of the units, I already had them, and people were collating privately, so we could know that I had won, even before. If you could do that ordinarily, then you now get to INEC, so it wasn't uploaded on iRev, and they now have to go to a collation center, where 100, you add a 0 at the end, it becomes 1,000, and all forms of magic begin to take place. I think if the law is is clear and definite and strong. All those attempts to bypass beavers, people won't try it anymore. What we saw in 2023 was deliberate to bypass beavers.
So, Sophia, these two appear to be related in a way. The automatic disqualification if accreditation fails, and the electronic the transmission electronically of results and voters that are accredited.
I actually thought this is the norm because INEC's guideline and their practices in like few elections before the 2023 general elections was if there's no beavers, there's no voting.
That's what they did.
But of course, the human elements thought they could bypass it, and that's why you could see lots of cancellations from some polling units. If you had done a little analysis of some result uploaded to the IRF, you see that even the presiding officer will cancel the election that he managed in the polling unit because of some of these issues. If not because of the way our country is, these are things that must not be in the extant law to say that you must. But these are issues that are addressed by the guidelines. No electronic accreditation, no voting. And that's on INEC's guidelines for the elections. And I think it's something we should uphold. There's no point for negotiation.
All right. So if and when the public hearing on this bill comes up.
When, not if. Because
when it comes up,
yes.
Civil society, will civil society be there to also put forward what it thinks of this bill?
We've started working on our memorandum already. We're just waiting for date to submit.
So
we've been waiting for the bills actually, and we're counting them by the day. As they come, we make our proposals and also compare it with findings from observations, with also citizens' feedback about the electoral process.
So, Honorable is likely to have a lot more amendments to this bill than he expected, both from his colleagues and from civil society and from the rest of.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Honorable, for your time. Honorable Francis Ejirogene Waive is the prime mover of the amendment bill to the 2022 Electoral Act. He represents Ughelli North, Ughelli South, Udu Federal Constituency of Delta State. He is a clergyman, he's an accountant, and an author. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, and we have also been joined by Sophia Binchi. Sophia Binchi is the head of knowledge management and learning at Yaga Africa. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And to you, our viewers out there, we want to thank you for investing your time with us today. We hope that you have benefited in terms of knowledge and understanding of the issues at stake, and that when the public hearing on this bill eventually comes up in the House of Representatives, you will be equipped well enough to go out there and make your input for a better electoral law and a better electoral system, electoral administration, and by implication, a better Nigeria. Bye for now. See you again when we bring you another edition of People, Politics, and Power.